So I'm Sarah. I'm a data scientist with a small hacking habit. And for the past couple of years, I've been working on ways to counter misinformation, especially online misinformation at scale. And I've generally been working with platforms, with journalists, with political data scientists, with other affected communities. But one community that I really want to see working here is you. What can ordinary people do? What can small communities do? So social engineering at scale, community guide, here's some things we can find useful. And definitions. So one thing, misinformation. Lots of different definitions. It's basically false information that is deliberately propagated. So it's not, whoops, I accidentally said something wrong on the internet. It's not like small-scale stuff. This is big-scale lies. And here's a couple of examples. So you might have heard about Macedonian teen sites. They're not teenagers at all, but so basically people who produce fake news sites so that it can get web traffic. And if you get web traffic to a site, you can get advertising dollars. It's worth money. And on the left, at the moment, this is one of the recent ones. They're pretty much on this medicine will cure your problems and some weird-ass alien Putin stuff. They'll probably switch to political as they come up towards the midterms. On the other side is a more typical piece of misinformation. So Muslim breakdowns, Toronto, so aimed at Canada. And one of the things I've seen recently is a switch from mostly US to US plus Canada. So we watched a bunch of bots and trolls from other nations pile onto what was domestic misinformation. So that's what it looks like. You'll see examples all the way through here. Social engineering. So your at BSides, you've probably seen some social engineering, but it's this idea of manipulating people. So psychological manipulation, and the classic definitions are for gaining access to information and getting people to perform actions. This is a third part. So you're not just getting people to perform actions, you're getting people to persuade other people to perform actions. So this is a scaling. So scale. These are some of the Facebook groups that went up to Congress recently. So these were other nation state created a set of activist groups like Blacktivists. And you'll note these aren't kind of like sort of crazy flag wavers. These LGBT and the Bernie Sanders coloring book is part of this. But the important thing is that these were misinformation sites designed to cause friction, chaos. And the shares there, 103 million shares. We're talking large-scale campaigns. It's not a few people. We're doing this at big. And at those scales, the mechanisms are different, the mechanisms for countering are different. And community response. And this is the little black box. I'm going to talk about some community responses from elsewhere. I haven't seen that much from the US yet. It would be nice to see it happen. So, impact. Why is misinformation important? So what's the risk here? What's the problem? And if you're an individual, there's some individual targeted misinformation, but there's also in-world individual impact. For example, we've seen several examples now, probably see more, where events have been set up for opposing groups at the same time, the same place. So this is somebody using misinformation online to create real-world conflict. And you could do this to a nation state, you can do this to a company, you can do this in lots of different places. So individuals get affected. Communities get affected. So I've done a lot of crisis mapping in my time, doing data support during disasters. And every crisis, we see a picture of a shark in a subway or in a street. Same shark. Shark gets around a lot. But it removes effort. We have to go out and stop these viral things happening because the sharks are funny, but if it's somebody talking about a bridge that's down that isn't, or shelters that are open that aren't, and we've seen that too, then that starts putting lives at risk. So that hits communities. Big scale, democracies. So QAnon, jury's still out about who started this and why and whatever, but what we're actually seeing is a lot of organizer pages like this. So this was for a specific date. It was like March, April maybe. And it was, okay, you're going to put out memes on all the platforms. So this is across all social media platforms. You're going to use these hashtags. You're going to sit on trending hashtags. So sometimes you see just this instruction. Sometimes you see suggested tweets. Sometimes you see images set up. So French campaigns, we saw a lot of image decks. And this is massive scale. This is country scale. This is world scale. So this stuff is dangerous at scale. So how big? Having sort of mentioned that, so how big are the scales? So smaller scale, your brain. That's the end target. The end target is your belief systems. And this diagram, this unreadable diagram, every single little spoke all the way around the outside is a cognitive bias the human has. And every single one of those is a vulnerability. I have some favorites. I really love the repetition ones. So if you repeat information, but you include not, so don't look at the elephant, don't look at the elephant, people don't remember the negatives. They only remember the positive part. This plays beautifully into misinformation campaigns as well, because they put out the false information, and anybody saying X isn't true, people only remember the X. Pushes it through. Another one is traces, information traces. So one thing about the human brain is it takes all information in as true, even though you know it isn't. So there are some beautiful timing experiments on that. So if I say, for example, haha, I crashed your car, and then, whoops, that was a joke. In the time it takes between me saying, haha, I crashed your car, and saying, whoops, that's a joke, that has fired off a bunch of other associations, like I am a dangerous driver, and you remember that I am a dangerous driver, even though you're told the negative immediately. And beautiful mechanisms, lots and lots of them being used. Targeting groups. This is one of the adverts that was used in the congressional, I think, hearings. And you can micro-target down to groups. So if you target down to specific demographics, you have a much more powerful campaign. You can target down to them. And beautiful piece of work, ad tech. And size, out again, all social sites. Every single social site that has some form of user-generated content has been attacked in some way, has misinformation on it. And we've been tracking, Facebook and Twitter are the big obvious ones, but you're also looking at comment sections, you're also looking at event sites, even financial sites. There are some beautiful misinformation campaigns around Bitcoin going on, but that's site. That's just where you find it, what it is. And scaling that. Trolls putting out misinformation on sites reaches some places. The way to make it really go is to make it viral by amplifying. And this is one of the Russian botnet sites. You can go buy something called an aged botnet. So about 100 accounts with emails that have already been verified that are 2015 age is, for example, it's about $150. And with that, you can use those bots and start pretending to be people, start pretending to be community managers. You want to use those carefully. At the other end of the scale, for a botnet that I could personally detect very quickly, it's about $6 per 1,000. So a bunch of Russians, unverified. If I wanted to do a big campaign, I would just buy a whole bunch of those. By the time it was taken down by the platforms, you've already got your messages through. So you're scaling out to millions here. So thousands of bots, millions of people. And that's what the problem is. That's how big it is. And potentially it's bigger. There are other things we can do. So who's doing this? So if we want to counter this, you need to think about who's behind it. And one of the groups behind it is the jokers, the sharks in the street. Guy in Scotland, American hurricane, tweets us out, goes viral. It's a mess. It was Hurricane Harvey. So tend to be one-off, tend to be opportunists, and they're really in it for the likes. They just want the attention. Entrepreneurs, the Macedonian teens. When I say Macedonian teens, that's actually not the only country. So there have been some fairly big-scale ones from Macedonia, but there have also been ones from Japan and other countries. So you've seen native stuff. This is worth money. People will make money. So again, websites, stories, push people to those stories. And you get money. I work in ad tech, and generally you're priced per 1,000 eyeballs. So somebody looks at a page, sees the advertising, the site gets paid. it's worth more if they click. It's worth even more if they make an action like filling out a form. So you want them to do things on your site. Mobs, brigading. So extremists sometimes just doing it for the lols, sometimes in the anonymous style, hey, look, this would be fun. Possibly behind QAnon, but given the amount of Russian stuff in there, possibly not. And I'm a little uncertain here because the QAnon, some of the big botnets have actually jumped on some of these campaigns, so it's hard to tell where one starts, the other one ends. And the big scale, nation states. So Russia is the big beastie on this, but they're not alone. There are other countries doing this too. In fact, pretty much any country can buy a bunch now. There's Jenna Abrams, very popular blogger, produced really beautiful little pithy quotes that got retweeted by the BBC, by Vogue, by other big sites. Except she didn't exist. And in between these talks, these pages about celebrity bottoms and style, and there were just these right-wing pro-Russian things just interleaved in. So you get the views, you get the eyeballs, you get people's attention through the cute stuff, and then you just chuck propaganda into the stream. There's a few of these going on. That's one of the mechanisms for them. But what do they want? So I've talked about attention. Which is the jokers just want to be seen, the Macedonians, the entrepreneurs, they're after the money, they persist, they generally have really good quality, they A/B test messaging, they do good work. The mobs, the groups, quite often they just want some form of division. So this is a community splitting apart into two communities. So it's a classic effect you see. And the nation states generally is geopolitical. So in case of Russia, it's probably wanting that Eastern European buffer zone. It seemed to be doing quite well at it. So things you can do. So one thing is you can go find these people or these accounts. You can collect the data on them. And things you can look at. So this is Bot Sentinel. There are a set of sites who have known trolls, known bots, and they track the sites, they track the associations of people on the sites, they track the content. So you can start seeing what's trending in bot world. So see 300 added today. There's a lot of botnets coming through. Artifacts, so you can look at the content of messagings. So one thing that happens a lot is you get hashtags that co-occur and then spin off on their own. So Walk Away, for example, co-occurred with QAnon and then became a big campaign in its own right. We see these campaigns coming. Correlated text. Personally, I tend to try to vary my text, but then I'm an AI machine learning person, I can do that. But you see a lot of the same phrases, same text appearing. It's very easy. Sometimes you just see identical text and thousands of it from dots of different places. So easy to find these damn things. It's almost scary. URLs. So if you've got something like the people making money, they need to push you to their site, which means you can look for their URLs. You can look at URLs that appear a lot to go find those sites. Once you've found them, you can then look for who's pointing at them. There's a two-way thing there. So content artifacts. But context is kind of more useful for a lot of this because, given skills, I expect a lot of the people running botnets to start varying their content. Even just a small change in text is going to make a difference in how you detect. So one thing, context, is you go look at the people who are already there. So you go to the hashtags you already know, you go to the botnets you already know, you go to the trolls you already know. See what they're talking about, see who else is around. You look at previous rumors, especially the sharks in the street style crisis rumors. They turn up again and again. We see the same shark, we see the same collapsing building, we see the same bridge again and again and again. You look at who's friending and following them. Are there patterns in there? If you look at the structures of botnets, you see these beautiful little close cliques. If you look at it in graph form. You look at, equally, the retweets and the likes. So who is promoting this stuff? Are there groups in there you can start to find and use? And then you look at the metadata. So, for instance, if you're looking at fake news sites, quite often there are groups of fake news sites, and we're seeing, especially in Canada at the moment, we're seeing clusters of sites. And you can go into their records and see if there are things with same owners, same characteristics. One thing I'm going to talk about is ads.text in a minute, but there are a bunch of metadata tags you can start using. Stories. So again, back to, are they talking about the same thing? Is there suddenly a story coming up? And one of the places to look for these is in the fake sites like Snopes, because people are reporting these things saying, is this true? So you tend to see stories starting to emerge. You can track down those. And money. So this thing is ads.text. I work for an ad tech firm, an exchange, and most of the big exchange. The exchange is the site that runs the auction. So every web page with advertising on is a website page, and it has a set of slots in it where you can put adverts. And when somebody looks at it, the first thing that happens is those slots fire back to Mummy, say, we need adverts, and people who have adverts that fit your demographic bid on your eyeballs. So very high frequency auction. And then the adverts go back to those slots. So if you want to work on our exchanges and other exchanges, and usually fake news sites are very, very good at building these. So ads.text tells you where those sites can advertise or are advertising, which exchanges they're using, and these are very good markers as well. So there are all of these pieces you can trace. So follow the money. There's a way to follow the money. So having talked about misinformation, sizings, ways to monitor, let's talk about how to push back. So one of the things is report. I've been working with some of the smaller platforms, and the bigger platforms are slowly getting their act together. The picture on the right is from yesterday, a MisinfoCon slide set from Facebook talking about how they're going to start doing different forms of reporting. But so far, it's not been that great. So Twitter suspended 70 million accounts. Most of those were inactives, which isn't really what a botnet does. And we didn't see a lot of a dip, a change in activities. Facebook has tried a bunch of things, including buttons, and they have a team on it. So you can report to them. Don't expect, hold your breath and expect much yet, but maybe this just gives them more data. You can report the money. So one thing, if you're seeing things like political advertising, targeted political advertising, or you see fake web pages with brand advertising on it, you can report back to groups like Sleeping Giants. And they are putting pressure on the advertisers not to advertise on those sites. Also, being in an ad tech exchange, there are blacklists for sites. So you can at least start talking to those people about moving that money flow. And a lot of this is running off money, so it's worth doing. You can block. At an individual level, there are lots of tools already out there for dealing with harassments. This is a small one that just blocks recent accounts, no numbers of followers, so you're not looking at things that are likely to be recent trolls, recent bots. And there are groupings you can use. You can engage. These are my favorite misinformation fighters. So these are the Lithuanians. So there are groups who call themselves elves, because elves versus trolls, in the Baltic states, because they have a lot at stake here. So it's Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and now Finland. And they're facing a wall of Russian misinformation in their local sites, and they push back. So generally they push back, they've learned the not thing, so they push back with truths, and they push back with humor. And they're getting some, oh shit, I'm too early. They're getting a fair bit of traction from doing this. There are other groups who have done this. I belong to a group called VOST, VOST Panama. So this is one of the groups that handles data during disasters, monitors social media feeds for anything new and interesting coming through, and they run anti-misinformation deployments too. We've always done it, they've just done it more formally. And they're doing it as this mix of humor and as this mix of asking nicely to please not, pushing back. I ran a deployment earlier this year on Irma. Last year, God, time flies. So I ran a similar deployment myself. We deployed Australian humor, which seems to work really well. There are other ways to engage. One way on the fake news sites is to use search engine optimization to sit above them. You create sites that are close to them, saying, hey, these guys are fake. So there's a whole bunch of interesting hackery tricks you can use. So engagement, repair. These things are doing a lot of damage. A lot of the point of the really big trolls isn't hey, everybody loves Russia. It's much more create divisions, form divisions cross country, make it weak. And there are groups like the Commons Project who are using bot troll type techniques. So they're using sets of bots to find people on either sides of these boundaries, these fractured communities, and then following up with humans to start repairing some of that damage. There's some interesting peace tech work coming on. But they also have repos and tools you can pull and use. And having talked about how to monitor and how to respond, one thing you probably end up doing is organizing some form of campaign. If there's a group of you, you're going to have to think about what you're going to be doing, why and how. And typically, I mean, there are plans, so a couple that I've been working on recently, so the 2018 Canadian elections, and that was mostly monitoring. So we were monitoring the local trolls, and they were monitoring as the non-native bots and trolls started piling onto their messaging. We watched US-focused messaging going into Canada, then we watched it migrate into Canadian-focused messaging. And so we're monitoring that. We're pushing that back and saying, hey guys, this is a problem. And the midterms, 2018 US midterms is likely to be bot troll season. So there's going to be a lot of groups working on this. We're doing some monitoring work on that. There's some coordinating going on. But if you're running a plan, you need to know what resources you have and need. You need to know your timings. Are there specific events, like elections? For Canada, we had the Ontario elections. We know we've got the New Brunswicks and the Quebec elections coming up. There's also other things, other timings within there. So the US midterms is likely to disrupt the activity that's sitting on Canada. It might draw effort away. So what are the timings? What is your end point? What are the resources and tools you need? And what are you planning to do here? Do you just want to monitor? Do you want to push back? What risks are you going to take in this? So this is, you need to plan. You need to think through this. And talking about risk, the two main risks you're likely to face are doxing. That's happened to the Lithuanians already. That was very weird. They got doxed by the Russians. They counter-doxed with the list of Russian trolls, and it all got messy and pages got removed. But the other thing is PTSD. So something we dealt with a lot during crisis deployments. You're dealing with difficult material, you're dealing with high stress, and that difficult material combined, people break. So you have to watch your people, you have to at least talk to the psychologist about and read the materials about what the signs are and what you can do to manage that. Always pair. Never ever do this stuff on your own. It's bad news. And coordination. There were going to be so many teams, there were already so many teams starting to run up for the 2018 US, and it'll just keep going. So one thing you'll need to be able to do is to talk to the other teams that are working in this area on this campaign. And one way of doing that is I'm actually part of a group, Credibility Coalition, who are working on standards for how you share information about different misinformation and different types of content and context misinformations. So, coordination. Okay, I appear to have given a very fast talk, so we're down to the takeaways. And the basic takeaways from this are you have opponents. Generally, what you're dealing with is a set of trolls, you're dealing with botnets who are amplifying, you're dealing with targeted advertisements. And what they're looking for varies, but it tends to be they're looking for attention, quite often looking for power, that geopolitical power. They're often looking for money, quite often as part of that power they're trying to create confusions. And your defenses against that is the monitoring, is finding all of these artifacts, finding these botnet groups, making those visible, and then responding to that. So reporting, so the platforms and EdTech reporting, elfing, and also there's a lot of political work going on in many countries now. So if you can input into that political work, that's good too. Just keep up the pressure on this. More information. MisinfoCon is a major community in this. They are at a conference right now in DC. So it's worth looking at their feed at the moment. I have a GitHub repo with a bunch of links to a lot of things I've talked about. I'm Bodicea Cat, and I've got to the end, and the last thing to do is to thank Straith, my mentor. Thank you.
Okay, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand. Excellent. And you'll need to talk directly into this one.
So you said that there's different types of groups, like you have the jokers and then the political activists. How often do you see one group try to leapfrog on another campaign? Let's say like someone gets Hurricane Harvey shark trending. Will you see an unrelated campaign, like a political campaign, just start throwing that hashtag on there just to get more traffic?
We've seen people camping on hashtag. That tends to be the brigades and the groups. But the more interesting is back in 2010, we saw what was probably the first Russian-backed misinformation campaigns during a disaster. So Kate Starbird noticed there were very specific rumors being put out during the BP oil spill. So there's sometimes several of the things at the same time, which is why I say it's really, you can't always tell. Some of the nation-state stuff, there are like markers, like, hey, these guys are really into Crimea freedom here. It seems a bit weird for the Fashion Mac. But other times, yeah, there's crosstalk. There's crosstalk. The brigades, it's really hard to tell what is native and what's nation-state. So.
We have time for one more question if somebody would like to jump up.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I was wondering, is there any takeaway for like the regular grandmom, my grandfather family to look for when things are fake news? How do they tell? Are there a telltale sign they could easily say from the Facebook stream, Twitter stream, or the social? Because, you know, that's
for them,
I get that asked a lot by my families. How do I know it's fake news? You know,
I would look in things like Snopes. I would first start looking at the sites and see if there's anything up saying this is fake. But if you're not doing large-scale data analysis, it's not so easy. That's one of the reasons we're trying to hit it at source, trying to hit it at platforms, and then moving. The use of communities is the backstop. You want to take this stuff off the platforms, you want to stop it propagating, and then at the end, when it's already on the platforms, already propagated out, then this is where you go, oh shit, now people at the far end have to do something. So yeah, there are some specific app-specific language communities, depending on who your grandfather and grandmother are, but yeah.
Regular people, they don't, if they see a thing, they think it's already targeted them, they retweet it and share it.
Mm-hmm. I have, yeah,
To call it on that one.
Okay.
Everybody, please give Sarah a big round of applause. And if you have more questions, you can find her outside.
yeah, I'm easy to find.